Palm Springs Modernism Week was held, and thousands of people from all over the world came to Palm Springs to look at old buildings. Why would anyone want to do that? Good question. Like many people in the Coachella Valley, I grew up completely ignorant of Palm Springs' unique contribution to the world of architecture. But since learning about modern architecture in Palm Springs, it's been something that's really enriched my experience of living there. According to local historian Tony Murchell, in the published version of his 1997 architectural tour, Palm Springs has one of the largest concentrations of modern architecture in the world. So Palm Springs became an enclave of modern architecture in the 20th century, and it's still home to hundreds of buildings that are not just architecturally significant, but are really, really cool. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about the general characteristics of modern architecture. Then I'm going to talk about the history of modernism in Palm Springs, and finally we'll look at 3 really amazing modern homes. Okay, so let's go over some of the basics of modern architecture. The style originated in the early 20th century. It became really popular after World War II. In the book Palm Springs Weekend, author Alan Hess sums up modernism as clean lines, flat roofs, and a hip, casual lifestyle. New building materials such as glass and steel were also widely used, as accessibility, functionality, and affordability were all big motivating factors in modern design. As Michelle Grimberry Brown puts it in her book Atomic Ranch, she mentions open floor plans, walls of glass, and indoor-outdoor living as some of the hallmarks of a modern dwelling. Okay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of modern architecture in Palm Springs. So according to a timeline in the 2007 issue of Palm Springs Life, the first important modern building in Palm Springs was the Oasis Hotel, built by Lloyd Wright, the son of Frank Lloyd Wright, opened in 1925. The hotel has been demolished, but the tower here and then part of the front facade is still standing on Palm Canyon. So during the 1930s, a lot of architects came to the desert to begin to experiment with modernism. One really notable local architect, Albert Frey, emigrated here from Switzerland during this time. Frey is known for a lot of really well-known buildings in town. The Palm Springs, this is Albert Frey right here. The Palm Springs, these are not the right orders. The aerial tramway station here, and the tramway gas station on Palm Canyon, which is now the Visitor Center, as well as the Palm Springs City Hall, and a lot of other important buildings around town. So before coming here, Frey had worked under Le Corbusier, who was an architectural heavyweight and considered one of the pioneers of modern design. Alan Hess describes Frey's coming here as the minor league Prometheus who brought the fire of modernism from the fountainhead to the sun-blasted wasteland. Okay? So even though movie stars had been buying property in Palm Springs since the late 20s, as Adele Seigelman puts it in her book Palm Springs Modern, the late 40s and 50s were when cocktail hour really kicked in. Stars such as Frank Sinatra, Cary Grant, and Marilyn Monroe all partied here and bought modern homes. And during this time, the Alexander Construction Company hired architect William Purcell. Let's see, we have, this is Robert and George, this is father and son team for the Alexander Construction Company. William Purcell hired William Purcell to develop tract houses in Palm Springs. Now these tract homes were meant to be affordable second houses for middle-class Americans, and they were really modern in their design. Robert Imbert talks in California Modern Magazine's website about how Purcell rotated the orientation and the floor plans of each home, offered a variety of roof lines and different facades in order to make these houses look less like a typical suburban tract house that you would imagine, and more like collections of individualized custom homes. So we have a couple examples of Alexander homes here. The Alexander Company came to such prominence that movie stars began to insist that their new home in Palm Springs be in Alexander. Tragically, Bob and George Alexander died in a plane crash in 1965, so their career in Palm Springs was only limited to a decade's length. But during this time, they built about 2,500 modern homes, and their contribution to making Palm Springs a modern landmark cannot be overstated. In fact, David Weinstein, in writing for California Modern Magazine, talks about how the Alexanders brought modernism to the masses and helped change the face of Palm Springs. So now I'm going to look at 3 houses, 3 modern homes that I think are really cool. So first, this is architect Albert Frey built this second home for himself into the mountainside of San Jacinto. It's perched up above Tahquitz Canyon Road. This is known as Frey House 2. He completely incorporated the home into the landscape. In fact, built the structure around this massive boulder and used it to separate the main living areas of the small rectangular home. See, this is the living area. On the other side would be the dining room, and then we have the sleeping area. And you can see how it's completely into the landscape like that. Joseph Rosa, in his book Albert Frey Architect, talks about how Frey used a all-steel frame construction. So here's the swimming pool with spans of glass and then corrugated aluminum. That would be quite the view from your pool right there. Okay, so next we have the House of Tomorrow. That was designed by William Crissell for the Alexander Company as more of a showcase home for publicity purposes. But Bob Alexander's wife fell in love with it, and they soon moved into it. In fact, a feature article was done on the house and the couple in the September 1962 issue of Look magazine. Picture of that here. I love this photo, it's so mod. I mean, look at how 60s that is. Look at her hairdo. So that's the living room of the circular house.
Wow.
And then we have, that's the main doorway. The house is also famous because Elvis and Priscilla Presley spent their honeymoon there. So as you'll see, they have it decorated now with all this stuff. So you'll also hear of this referred to as the Elvis honeymoon hideaway. So last but not least, we have the Elrod House. Now, according to a 2009 issue of Palm Springs Life, Allison Engel talks about the Elrod House, designed by John Lautner in 1968, as being most memorable for, as you can see, this big or enormous concrete dome roof with the wedge-shaped skylights here. Now, a lot like Frey House 2, Lautner built this house using existing boulders that were already on the building site and worked those into the design and construction of the home. Now, the Elrod House is up on South Ridge, kind of near where the Bob Hope House is, if anyone knows what that is. And the living room has this spectacular 220-degree view of the valley floor that stretches all the way over 180 degrees. So the Elrod House was used in the film, the James Bond movie, Diamonds Are Forever, if anybody saw that one.
Oh my goodness.
With Sean Connery. It's with Bambi and Thumper when he comes to the house and they like beat him up and he throws him in the pool. That was his house. So, there's a, you can't see that very well, but it's an example of how these boulders are used along this interior walkway. From the outside. It's also been home to several Playboy photo shoots. Fortunately, I don't have any examples of those today. And it's currently on the market for $13.8 million.
Dang.
There's a view of the back pool. So, to wrap things up, I'll just review a little bit of what I talked about today. First, we talked about the general characteristics of modern architecture, things like walls of glass, clean lines, indoor and outdoor living. Then I went over the history of Palm Springs architecture from the Oasis Hotel in the 1920s all the way to the modern homes developed by the Alexander Company in the 50s and 60s. And then finally, we looked at 3 really amazing modern homes, the Frey House 2, the House of Tomorrow, and the Elrod House. So hopefully all of you will leave here with some new appreciation for Palm Springs modern architecture. Because not only is it a really fascinating part of our local history, it's really fun, it's hip, it's swanky, and most importantly, it's very mod.